Coming to you from the wacky left coast, Pacific Northwest, this is Net News Network Headline News, brought to you by the Behind the Line podcast. National and world news that matters, the stories the MSM won't talk about, deciphering the truth through all the lies. For more, visit BehindTheLinePodcast.com.
Well, Vladimir gave his big speech this morning, and he has delivered a warning to the West over Ukraine by suspending a landmark nuclear arms control treaty, announcing that new strategic systems had been put on combat duty and threatening to resume nuclear tests. Nearly a year after ordering an invasion that has triggered the biggest confrontation with the West in 6 decades, Putin said Russia would achieve its aims and accused the West of trying to destroy it. The elites of the West do not hide their purpose, but they also cannot fail to realize that it is impossible to defeat Russia on the battlefield, he told his country's political and military elite. Alleging that the United States was turning the war into a global conflict, Putin said Russia was suspending participation in the New START Treaty, its last major arms control treaty with Washington. Signed by then U.S. President Barack Obama and his Russian counterpart Dmitry Medvedev in 2010, the treaty caps the number of strategic nuclear warheads that the countries can deploy. Due to expire in 2026, it allows each country to physically check the other's nuclear arsenal, although tensions over Ukraine had already brought inspections to a halt. U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken called Putin's move deeply unfortunate and irresponsible. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said it made the world a more dangerous place and urged Putin to reconsider. The Russian leader said, without citing evidence, that some in Washington were considering breaking a moratorium on nuclear testing. If the United States conducts tests, then we will. No one should have dangerous illusions that global strategic parity can be destroyed, Putin said. A week ago, I signed a decree on putting new ground-based strategic systems on combat duty. It was not immediately clear which systems he meant. Putin said Ukraine had sought to strike a facility deep inside Russia where it keeps nuclear bombers, a reference to Engels Air Force Base. Russia and the United States together hold 90% of the world's nuclear warheads. The New START Treaty limited each side to 1,550 warheads on deployed missile launchers and heavy bombers. Both sides met the central limits by 2018. Russia's foreign ministry said later on Tuesday that Moscow intended to continue abiding by the restrictions outlined in the treaty on the number of warheads it could have deployed. Putin, who has over the past year repeatedly hinted that Russia could use a nuclear weapon if threatened, was in effect saying that he could dismantle the architecture of nuclear arms control unless the West backs off Ukraine. Putin said the conflict had been forced on Russia, particularly by NATO's eastward expansion since the Cold War. The United States says it's also concerned Beijing may be considering supplying weapons to Russia, a step that might transform the war into a confrontation between Russia and China on the one side and Ukraine and NATO on the other. China, whose top diplomat Wang Yi visited Moscow on Tuesday, has dismissed these concerns and cautioned against any nuclear escalation while reaffirming a new wide-ranging alliance with Russia. Nikolai Patrushev, the secretary of Putin's powerful Security Council, told Wang that China was a top priority for Russian foreign policy and the two countries must stick together against the West, Russian state news agencies reported. It seems to be only a matter of time before some type of escalation occurs, at least in Ukraine. More than likely, some sort of tactical nuclear weapon is going to be used, I'm guessing. Russia, I'm sure, is beginning to feel like it's backed in a corner, and you've got this recent information that came out about the Nord Stream pipeline and the U.S. and Norway's possible involvement in its destruction, which I think is just obviously clear. Just now we have a whistleblower stating the fact. Russia is going to respond to this. Russia is going to act. It is only a matter of time. Putin built up and built up on the border of Ukraine for months before the actual invasion occurred, all the while saying that that wasn't going to happen, that it was just training exercises. Got the same sort of thing, same sort of rhetoric going on now with the nuclear weapons talk and, Ukraine and everything else going on over there. So I just think it's a matter of time till he has all his pieces in place and decides the time is right. And you've got an inept American president on this side who won't know how to respond to any of that, and all these countries have seen it in recent weeks. Months, years, the way Biden handled Afghanistan, the way he's handled these balloons coming over the country. It's a joke. Every time he gets up to speak in public, it's a joke. We're weak. We're the weakest we've ever been. And these countries know it. And they smell blood in the water. And the fact is that America and Western countries and pretty much all the countries need some sort of major event to happen to do something about the world economy. And unfortunately, war is inevitably good for at least one side's economy. And really, as much debt as we're in and as much trouble as the global economy is in, something massive has to happen. And war would be an easy one for these governments to use to their benefit. They're always looking for the next Pearl Harbor, and this, I'm afraid, is going to be it. If you're not a prepper, you should start. You should start putting stuff away for your family. You should have an insurance policy for your family, for supply chain shortages, for long-term power outages or other issues with infrastructure. And just days after the multiple balloon debacle in the US, where we supposedly shot down one Chinese spy balloon and the rest of them were just private or educational related balloons. Yeah, right. Which, by the way, makes us look equally as stupid for shooting those down, if that were the case, which I don't believe for one moment that they were private or educational, like colleges sending up weather balloons or something. That's a load of garbage from our government. But how inept are we if we're out there running around suddenly shooting down private balloons and college balloons, and we don't know the difference between what with our military? Highly unlikely. Now you've got another large white balloon seen by pilots over Honolulu, Hawaii. The balloons are the balloon pilots are describing as a large white balloon at approximately 40,000 feet over Honolulu. These reports have not yet been confirmed by air traffic control or other U.S. officials. Par for the course, the flying object was said to have been seen by several pilots. There's also an image circulating online that shows what appears to be a pilot in the cockpit holding a note. The note reads, "Report of a large white balloon in vicinity of," and he gives the GPS coordinates, "precise altitude unknown, advise ATC if object is seen." Sunday, the Oakland Oceanic Air Traffic Control Center confirmed the existence of the flying object. In terms of altitude, this unidentified flying object was seen floating up to 50,000 feet, according to the outlet. Again, the U.S. government under the Biden administration is just demonstrating its weakness on just about every level. We all know the IRS is looking to gain a whole bunch of new agents to come after us all. And as they seek to bolster the ranks of its weapons-carrying criminal investigation unit, a former special agent described the inner workings of the division and said its key function is to, quote, put the fear of God in people, unquote, and intimidate Americans into tax compliance. Former IRS Special Agent Robert Norlander told Accounting Today in a wide-ranging interview published on February 20th that while most Americans have a sense of what IRS tax audits look like, the work of the IRS Criminal Investigation Unit is shrouded in some mystery. Dubbed gun toters, the armed special agents in the unit are responsible for enforcing those parts of the tax code whose violations amount to crimes, he said. When crimes are committed, the IRS CI are the ones who actually enforce the law, Norlander said. The IRS CI examines potential criminal activity related to tax crimes and makes recommendations for prosecution to the tax division of the Department of Justice. There are now around 2,100 gun toters in the Criminal Investigations Division, and the IRS, flush with funds from a new cash injection, is looking to hire more special agents. The idea of an army of 87,000 new tax enforcement agents surged into the spotlight and became an internet meme after Republicans warned that the $80 billion in new IRS funding under the Inflation Reduction Act would squeeze ordinary Americans for every last penny. 87,000 more IRS enforcers would make the IRS bigger than the Pentagon, the State Department, and Border Patrol combined. Republican National Committee Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel said in a tweet last summer when the Inflation Reduction Act was passed and the IRS funding boost hit headlines. President Biden, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, former IRS Commissioner Charles Rettig, and others have pushed back on such framing on the funding boost. They've insisted the money would be used to increase collections from high earners and help with customer service, while Americans earning less than $400,000 would face increased scrutiny from the agency. But we all know that's a lie because he's wanting to look at everybody making deposits of $600 or more. So, like everything else this administration does and says, it's a lie. The federal government and the IRS would like nothing more than to come after you for every dime they can squeeze out of you. Every bit of tax they can get from you. Unconstitutional tax, I might add. And speaking of lies, Speaker McCarthy has made good on his promise and has turned over 41,000 hours of January 6 video footage to Tucker Carlson. Carlson and his crew are currently sifting through the video with Capitol Police present. And so far, what he said about it is it's nothing like we were told. Imagine that. Imagine that they lied about that. I certainly hope the truth is going to come out about this, and the people who lied and falsified information and covered up are going to be held responsible. These politicians, for once, need to be held responsible. Everybody knows this whole January 6th debacle was a con job by the Democrats. Total con job. Totally trumped up to be more than what it was. And these government political liars, politicians, need to be held accountable. And the Biden administration loves to give up the U.S. sovereignty. I reported on the Declaration of North America that he signed with Mexico and Canada just about a month ago. Now he's preparing to sign up the United States to a legally binding accord with the World Health Organization, the WHO, that would give the Geneva-based UN subsidiary the authority to dictate America's policies during a pandemic. Despite widespread criticism of the WHO's response to the COVID pandemic, U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra joined with WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom and I can't pronounce the rest of this guy's name, in September of 2022 to announce the U.S. WHO Strategic Dialogue. Together they developed a platform to maximize the long-standing U.S. government WHO partnership and to protect and promote the health of all people around the globe, including the American people. These discussions and others spawned the Zero Draft of a pandemic treaty published on February 1st, which now seeks ratification by all 194 WHO member states. A meeting of the WHO's intergovernmental negotiating body is scheduled for February 27th to work out the final terms, which all members will then sign. Written under the banner of the World Together Equitably, the Zero Draft grants the WHO the power to declare and manage a global pandemic emergency. Once a health emergency is declared, all signatories, including the United States, would submit to the authority of the WHO regarding treatments, government regulations such as lockdowns and vaccine mandates, global supply chains, and monitoring and surveillance of populations. Wow. Well, I'll tell you, I don't need some goon from Europe telling me I have to get a vaccine in order to go to work. We have enough of those goons here in the U.S., and we don't need to be giving up those kind of rights to a foreign country. We have our rights protected by the Declaration of Independence and our Bill of Rights, and they don't get to supersede that for whatever reason, pandemic or not. They want to see a centralized vaccine and medication-based response and a very restrictive response in terms of controlling populations. David Bell, a public health physician and former WHO staffer specializing in epidemic policy, told the Epoch Times, "They get to decide what is a health emergency, and they are putting in place a surveillance mechanism that will ensure that there are potential emergencies to declare." Physician Merrill Nass told Epoch Times, "If these rules go through as currently drafted, I, as a doctor, will be told what I am allowed to give a patient and what I am prohibited from giving a patient whenever the WHO declares a public health emergency. So they can tell you you're getting remdesivir, but you can't have hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin. What they're also saying is they believe in equity, which means everybody in the world gets vaccinated whether or not you need it, whether or not you're already immune. Regarding medical treatments, the accord would require member nations to monitor and regulate against substandard and falsified pandemic-related products. Based on previous WHO and Biden administration policy, this would likely include forcing populations to take newly developed vaccines while preventing doctors from prescribing non-vaccine treatments or medicines. A key question surrounding the accord is whether the Biden administration can bind America to treaties and agreements without the consent of the U.S. Senate, which is required under the Constitution. The Zero Draft concedes that, per international law, treaties between countries must be ratified by national legislatures, thus respecting the right of their citizens to consent. No kidding. However, the draft also includes a clause that the accord will go into effect on a provisional basis as soon as it is signed by delegates to the WHO, and therefore it will be legally binding on members without being ratified by legislatures. There are also several U.S. Supreme Court decisions that may support the Biden administration in this. They include State of Missouri versus Holland, in which the Supreme Court ruled that treaties supersede state laws. Other decisions, such as the United States versus Belmont, ruled that executive agreements without Senate consent can be legally binding with the force of treaties. The WHO pandemic agreement calls for member states to implement One Health surveillance. One Health is a concept that has been embraced by the UN, the CDC, the World Bank, and other global organizations. Signatories also agree to support the official narrative when it comes to information about a pandemic. Specifically, they will conduct regular social listening and analysis to identify the prevalence and profiles of misinformation, and design communications and messaging strategies for the public to counteract misinformation, disinformation, and false news, thereby strengthening public trust. Do you still believe that you live in a free country? Do you trust your government? And in case you didn't know, the US government has been secretly tracking those of you who didn't get the COVID jab, as well as those who aren't up to date on their shots. Worse, it's recording the reason why. The US government has secretly been tracking those who didn't get the COVID jab or are only partially jabbed through a previously unknown surveillance program designed by the US National Center for Health Statistics, a division of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The program was implemented on April 1st, 2022, and adopted by most medical clinics and hospitals across the U.S. starting January 2023. Under this program, doctors at clinics and hospitals have been instructed to ask patients about their vaccination status, which is then added to their electronic medical records as a diagnostic code known as ICD-10 code, so that they can be tracked inside and outside of the medical system. These new ICD-10 codes are part of the government's plan to implement medical tyranny using vaccine passports and digital IDs. The government is also tracking noncompliance with all other recommended vaccines using new ICD-10 codes and has implemented codes to describe why you didn't get a recommended vaccine. It's also added a billable ICD code for vaccine safety counseling. And you'll never guess who created the ICD codes. Why, the World Health Organization did. That's who. And doctors. Except those in private practice who don't accept insurance are required to use these codes to describe a patient's condition and the care they receive during their visit. So, if you want to avoid these codes, you're going to need to go to a private practice doctor who doesn't accept insurance and only takes cash, and these can be found. These codes are going to go right along with this treaty that I just talked about, and the next time there's a pandemic, they're going to know right where to go for the people who don't take the shots. And guess what? Later down the road, when they get this electronic currency that they're pushing so hard to implement this early summer of 2023, they could just as easily decide, since you don't have a shot and you don't have these codes, or you have the wrong codes, they're just going to shut off your money supply. This is just another violation of your rights as a quote-unquote free American. You should not have to submit to this kind of government intrusion, forcing you to do things, tracking everything you do, and why you do it. What can be done about this? Not much, probably, but you should reach out to your representatives and let them know that you are deeply disturbed about the government's intrusion into your medical privacy. And in light of everything that's come out in recent weeks about these vaccines and Pfizer specifically, but you know what's going on at Moderna and the others as well, that this is all a money-making scheme, and that's it. And these things are dangerous, they're untested, they're causing numerous deaths, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of deaths, and other medical problems. And yet they still want to force this issue. They still want to force you to take these things. Why is that? People with no medical degree want to tell doctors what they can tell patients, what they can prescribe to patients, and how to do their jobs. People who have gone to school for many years to become a medical professional are being told by some jackass who's never had a real job, more than likely, and only created public policy their whole life. Those people are going to tell them what to do. It makes absolutely no sense. Why is our federal government giving up all of our rights like this? It only takes a few minutes to email your representative, and I implore you to do that. Call them, email them, reach out, and do it more than once. You need to let them know how displeased you are. You also need to share this information with your friends, because whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, this should concern you. It should deeply concern you. We should not be giving up these kind of rights to foreign political bodies. And you should not be giving up your right to privacy in this country. You should not be being tracked for stuff like this. You should not be being tracked for any reason. Seems to be just one thing after the next, and it's coming faster and faster every day. In the words of Ronald Reagan, government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives.
Thank you for listening to the Behind the Line podcast. If you like this broadcast, please like and share it. Please follow us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, Twitter, Truth Social, Telegram, Gab, Parler, and LinkedIn. You can find our podcast at BehindTheLinePodcast.com, NetNewsNetwork.net, and on Anchor, Spotify, Amazon Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and anywhere podcasts can be found. Thank you for your support.